18-year-old Natalie Jane Martin had just crossed a threshold into a new chapter. The predictable rhythms of bells, chores, and small-town chatter were finally fading. Her immediate future appeared as a vast, unwritten landscape of possibility. She looked toward university, work, and the discovery of a self she had yet to meet. Caught between these milestones, she joined a final celebratory excursion to Myrtle Beach. South Carolina offered sun and music, providing that specific intoxication of unsupervised freedom. The trip was supposed to be a vibrant celebration of her independence. Yet, a fundamental shift had occurred before she even packed a bag. For years, she had been linked to Blake William Lincolnis, an Ohio local. They were a community fixture, held together by the invisible weight of shared history. While it appeared typical to observers, the internal reality was beginning to warp. Peers later recalled a persistent, suffocating jealousy and interrogations disguised as casual talk. He monitored her location and companions, demanding immediate responses to every digital check-in. Such behaviors are often subtle, masquerading as protective devotion or intense concern. Control frequently wears the mask of care. She ended things in early 2023. Their final conversation remains private. What is certain is her decision to walk away. She chose agency over a life revolving around someone else's volatile emotions. That specific assertion of autonomy is often where the real danger begins. Lethal domestic patterns rarely begin with an explosion. They follow a chillingly predictable arc. A loss of dominance leads to a set boundary, which triggers a final split. For a mind rooted in entitlement, a partner's departure is processed as humiliation. For those who cannot tolerate losing authority, that wounded ego can turn lethal. The romance had ended, but their lives remained dangerously entangled. Shared social circles meant the graduation trip proceeded with both of them present. In small towns, breakups rarely provide immediate distance. The past remains visible. Natalie attempted to maintain civility within the group for everyone's sake. To a person who equates love with possession, her presence signaled an opportunity. The coastal getaway had become a psychological pressure cooker, waiting for a spark. Seeking more accounts of true darkness? Discover Unreal True Crime, British edition. Explore 35 harrowing homicide investigations designed to challenge your perspective. Secure your copy via Amazon or download the digital file from our website links. Obtain your copy today. Now, let us return to the unfolding investigation. We often envision control as a series of loud, aggressive commands. More often, it is a softer manipulation, the tone of a partner playing the victim. It begins as a pointed question, "Where were you?" or "Why didn't you call?" Arbitrary rules are rebranded as mutual agreements for the sake of total transparency. Sharing passwords is sold as intimacy, though it functions as a surveillance system. This digital access only breeds a demand for more total oversight. Any resistance is weaponized as proof that the victim has something to hide. Within a long-term teenage dynamic, this toxicity is often dismissed as normal jealousy. Families might overlook the instability as growing pains, while the victim manages the offender. The relationship shifts from a source of joy to a project of emotional maintenance. This shift fundamentally changes how the final breakup is ultimately perceived. While Natalie viewed the separation as a definitive end to the chapter, the controller viewed it as temporary defiance to be broken through force. To a dominant personality, a romance only concludes once they grant permission, making any interaction following a split a potential flashpoint. Common social circles and overlapping routines serve as arenas for psychological dominance. Youth, specifically, offers little escape from these crowded dynamics. Students coexist in lecture halls and athletic teams. Even when a pair dissolves, their mutual network remains intact. The collective drive for harmony often masks underlying friction, a claustrophobia that intensified during their celebratory coastal getaway. They occupied the same residence, distributing tasks from shared transportation to communal dining. There was zero sanctuary for de-escalation. Any departure from the group risked fueling rumors or unwanted scrutiny. This localized friction permeates the atmosphere, exerting a dual psychological burden on the participants. It forces the aggressor to maintain a facade of composure while compelling the target to suppress their discomfort to save the vacation. Consequently, Natalie likely prioritized tranquility over her own intuition regarding Blake. Observers might have noticed the strained energy, but likely dismissed it as a passing phase of post-relationship tension. By valuing social ease over confrontation, the group inadvertently creates a shield for the most volatile individual. On June 6, 2023, the circle ventured out, seeking the typical distractions of newfound adulthood. They pursued the electricity of the nightlife, eventually arriving at the House of Blues in North Myrtle Beach. The trivialities of the music and spirits and the scattered dialogue dissolve into the typical haze of a vacation. But one specific interaction shifted the trajectory. Natalie had initiated contact with a local resident. While standard for a moving life, such autonomy often triggers a possessive ex-partner. It served as a stark reminder that her future was proceeding without him. For someone driven by control, this independence feels like a violation. The content of the text mattered less than the declaration of agency. Representing her liberation, Natalie eventually withdrew from the festivities, returning to their lodgings due to illness. Blake followed her back, while the others remained out, oblivious to the lethal silence descending upon that distant bedroom. Forensics and testimony later allowed detectives to piece together the harrowing events that followed. Words may mislead, but the cold chronology of digital data remains immutable. Seized transmissions and secured entryways tell a story. In a criminal case, these data points serve as fundamental pillars of truth. Telemetry reports were instrumental in establishing the precise moment the tragedy occurred. Natalie's mobile device went dark at 10:17 p.m. on June 6th. Blake's mirrored this inactivity, only resuming 45 minutes later. By 11:02 p.m., he transmitted a text to his father that investigators interpreted as a preliminary confession. These chronological markers are vital precisely because they are untainted by the unreliability of human recollection. They exist in the vacuum of objective fact. A deactivated phone is a signal of something far more sinister than a dead battery. It suggests a deliberate termination of one's digital presence at the exact moment a life-altering event transpires. Within the confines of the rental unit, behind a secured door, Natalie's life was taken through manual strangulation, a term carrying a heavy, intimate weight beyond its forensic definition. This specific act of violence necessitates a terrifying level of physical proximity and unwavering focus. It is an agonizingly slow process, requiring the perpetrator to remain actively engaged throughout the victim's struggle. Such a method results in specific physical evidence that points toward a prolonged application of force. Pathologists note that this process requires several minutes to reach a fatal conclusion, offering multiple points for the assailant to relent. This time frame is critical in a legal context, as it effectively dismantles any defense of accidental harm. It reflects a sustained, conscious choice. As Natalie fought to breathe, her assailant had to actively maintain the assault. Her survival instincts were met with a relentless and lethal determination to succeed. When the violence ceased, she lay dead in a space originally intended for youthful celebration and shared memories. What followed was a period of inaction that spoke volumes. No emergency services were summoned as the hours ticked by. Inside the house, the other occupants began to sense a shift in the atmosphere. Sounds of a struggle had been heard, physical impacts and raised voices, but they failed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Young adults often lack the tools to identify lethal red flags, preferring to shy away from interpersonal conflict. They operate under the hopeful assumption that volatile emotions will eventually settle without outside interference. Most people avoid crossing social lines, fearing that a misinterpretation of a private dispute might cause unnecessary embarrassment. Social norms often mask the danger. By June 7th, the reality within those walls finally bled into the open. A 911 call reached Horry County dispatchers around 9 in the morning, signaling more than a medical emergency. It served as the first indication that this vacation rental had transformed into a grim crime scene. A frantic voice reported an unconscious 18-year-old on Maison Drive, the sheer terror audible through the receiver. They mentioned performing life-saving measures on a cold body, implying hope had already withered away. First responders encountered a nightmare no youth should see, finding shaken friends gathered outside the home. Deep within a bedroom lay the lifeless body of Natalie Martin. Detectives immediately knew this wasn't health-related. Bruising on Natalie's neck pointed directly toward manual strangulation. Tossed linens and slight chaos suggested a violent struggle rather than a quiet night of rest. With the door locked and no signs of theft or intrusion, the possibility of a random predator faded. All clues suggested the threat originated from within her own inner circle. Blake Lincolnis stood among the group, a former flame with the perfect mix of access, chance, and reason. Those core elements of suspicion solidified because he was present during her final hours. His presence behind that locked door coupled with a volatile past, hinted at a lethal confrontation. Evidence, not intuition, drives criminal cases. Authorities began with the basics: movements, timelines, and the final moments anyone saw her alive. They scrutinized the exact moment the locked door was noted and what excuses were offered for it. Every response served as a data point to be verified against forensics and digital footprints. Blake bore minor puncture marks, which the police suspected were wounds he gave himself. Staged self-harm often serves to flip the script, replacing guilt with a facade of overwhelming sorrow. Post-violence injury frequently blurs the line between legitimate regret and a calculated legal defense. Psychology is complex, yet experts observed that his scratches hardly resembled a sincere effort at suicide. Accounts placed him isolated in that room for several hours, a critical window for the investigation. Solitude with a corpse forces detectives to question more than just the cause of death. It suggests the fabrication of a narrative, scene manipulation, and the intentional stalling of the discovery. While technicians scoured for genetic material and prints, every inch of the space was captured on film. Forensic teams studied the blood spatters from his wounds to determine the precise timing of his actions. Their goal was to construct an airtight sequence of events that defied any alternate explanation. Technological evidence proved pivotal, as mobile data pinpointed the exact time frame of her final moments. Logs showed a period of total digital silence, followed by the reactivation of only one device. A message sent to his father that evening would eventually serve as a cornerstone for the prosecution. His admission of a major mistake sounded less like shock and more like a dawning realization of guilt. Police found past logs exposing his troubling psychological state. Old texts filled with threats and manipulation painted a portrait of toxic fixation. Peers recounted past aggression following their split, describing physical altercations that went far beyond mere posturing. Their history suggested a dynamic defined by ownership rather than affection, a key point for the state. This often baffles observers, as victimizers frequently mimic genuine care and moments of soft affection. Attentiveness often masks a need for power, which they mistakenly view as a sign of deep devotion. They mistake control for devotion. To him, Natalie's independence felt like a direct assault. The case progressed rapidly. By June 8, 2023, he was in custody for homicide, with a full admission eventually following. Yet, even admissions are often layered with rationalizations and emotional shields to soften the harsh truth. When the proceedings hit the courts, a stunning ruling left the public in total disbelief. He received bail, which theoretically serves as a risk assessment rather than a verdict on his crimes. Its purpose is to weigh flight risks against the potential for witness tampering or further violence. Legal systems typically balance factors like maturity, criminal history, social connections, and psychiatric assessments. Jurisdictions often push for leniency, urging magistrates to bypass jail before trial without ironclad justification. This procedural lenience often fractures when facing domestic tragedy, where the ultimate danger, total loss, is already a reality. Survivors must navigate a forward-looking bureaucracy while their trauma remains anchored in the past. The pretrial release wasn't significant for its impact on the proof, but for exposing how readily the state minimizes brutality when originating from a youthful, recognizable figure who defies the conventional image of a predator. Bail was set at $150,000, paired with ankle tracking and home confinement. Blake retreated to his family's Ohio residence as proceedings stalled. To the victims, this wasn't mere procedure. It felt like a fresh assault, organizing a burial, while seeing the alleged killer regain his freedom. Modern law rests upon the fundamental protection of those facing charges, which is vital. Yet, when evidence of savagery is overwhelming, the chasm between cold statute and raw agony widens. Months stretched into almost 2 years. Files were compiled. Testimonies were gathered. Counsel debated behind closed doors. The bureaucratic gears ground on as the family endured the void. By March 2025, Blake admitted to the crime. A public trial was bypassed, sparing the grieving the horror of clinical details and gruesome evidence. However, this also ensured many specifics remained buried in paperwork rather than aired before the public. During the final hearing, the state highlighted the chilling implications of the physical act. Ending a life by hand, the bench remarked, is no accident. It demands prolonged resolve. Lenience was off the table. He received 45 years behind bars, with no path to early release. Blake addressed the room, calling her his soulmate and claiming he simply failed in his duty to safeguard her. Such phrasing is haunting precisely because it is a cliché in the psychology of intimate abuse. It frames the aggressor as a victim of fate, a guardian unable to stop a threat that actually came from his own grip. This remains a particularly dark hallmark of controlling aggression. The predator adopts the mask of the protector even while dealing the fatal blow. Closure seemed imminent until December 2025, when Blake challenged the verdict through a legal petition. He contended the act didn't warrant the highest felony charge, seeking to downgrade the severity of the conviction. Essentially, despite his admission and sentencing, he sought to rewrite the story of that night. To those left behind, this legal maneuver felt like an intentional tearing of half-healed wounds. It redirected focus toward his excuses and claims of accidental harm, exposing a deeper mental reality. Dominance often outlives the bond, manifesting as a legal siege where brutality is rebranded as a tragic mistake. It is the final attempt to dictate the narrative when the victim is no longer there to speak. Observers frequently wonder why no intervention occurred before the breaking point. While well-intentioned, the inquiry assumes the red flags were glaringly apparent to everyone involved. Usually, they are hidden. Adolescent passion often mimics obsession, and toxic envy is mistaken for devotion. Youthful naivety is frequently confused with harmlessness. Early signs of dominance are often excused as growing pains, but this tragedy proves how fast those behaviors turn lethal. Severing ties doesn't guarantee security. Occasionally, it serves as the catalyst for ultimate vengeance. It reveals the possessive core of the abuser, the terrifying conviction that their partner's life is their property or nothing. We cannot change the past, but we can map the trajectory of the warning signs that were present. A connection defined by chronic suspicion and monitoring. A pattern of intimidation and early outbursts that signaled a boundary being shattered. An intertwined social circle that forced them together long after the split. An excursion to a remote setting, far from supervision, fueled by substance use and isolation behind closed doors. Individually, these are red flags. Combined, they form a lethal combination. Natalie's inner circle is haunted by questions that lack any comforting resolutions. Their existence is now permanently bifurcated into a before and a shattering after. Her confidant, Brooklyn Frell, transitioned to activism, warning that domestic terror isn't cinematic, it's a reality signaled by ignored alarms. Such advocacy is gut-wrenching, requiring survivors to educate the public using the very trauma that redefined them. Natalie's father delivered remarks capturing the agony of navigating a legal system that moves at a glacial pace. He lamented a stolen future, family milestones and memories that now only inhabit his imagination. These profound human losses remain far beyond the reach of standard sentencing metrics. Public analysis of these tragedies often fixates on the internal pathology of the offender, clinical profiles and character quirks, excuses that frame the brutality as a mere psychological outlier. Reports noted Blake's neurodivergence. While this offers developmental context, it provides no alibi for premeditated cruelty. Clinical labels do not kill. Individuals do. The critical focus belongs on the cycle of dominance, obsession, and the fatal explosion when total control evaporates. If a lesson exists that honors her memory without exploiting the tragedy, it is this. Possession isn't passion. Envy isn't loyalty. Surveillance isn't an act of love. A partner who fears your autonomy isn't just insecure, they're a threat. Natalie Martin would be in her early 20s today. She should be forging a career, failing occasionally, and laughing at things that lose meaning with time, experiencing the weight of adulthood. Instead, she's a warning one only useful if we learn to decode it. Dawn broke over Maison Drive after the discovery. Outside, the shoreline maintained its usual, indifferent mask of beauty. The tides moved as always. Rentals sat silent in the light. The universe refused to pause for grief. In one residence, a life was extinguished. Our duty is to recognize the predator's trail before the final act. We must respect the quiet red flags before they transform into morning headlines, safeguarding futures not yet erased. This is the only resolution this narrative permits. Not peace, but perspective. Love is a sanctuary, not a cage. Love should feel like a wide-open horizon, not a claustrophobic room with a locked door. In the shadows of Natalie Jane, Martin's story lies a chilling truth we often refuse to see. Possession is not passion, and surveillance is not an act of care. True affection breathes in the space of trust. It doesn't demand your passwords, it doesn't monitor your every step, and it never interrogates your autonomy. We must stop romanticizing intense jealousy as a sign of deep devotion. When a partner views your independence as a threat, they aren't protecting you, they are colonizing you. Control often wears the persuasive mask of a protector, whispering that its grip is for your own safety. But real love empowers. It doesn't diminish. It celebrates your wings. It doesn't clip them. Let Natalie's memory be our siren song. Listen to the quiet alarms of your intuition. If someone makes you feel like you need permission to exist, to walk away, or to run, your life belongs to you, and you alone. We owe it to those whose voices were silenced to recognize that the greatest expression of love is the freedom to be yourself, unfettered and unafraid.